Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We are about to get started. Have a few more people trickling in, so welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Helen Schroeder. You may have seen me at some of our past webinars. I will be your moderator for today, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Brittany Anderson, who will be presenting. Sigma Assessment Systems, for any of you who don't know, is a professional service firm that offers talent development, succession planning, and psychological assessments for organizations looking to build their internal talent pools. We've been in business for over 50 years, so we have a lot of experience, and we're happy to be here sharing some of that with you today. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Brittany will walk you through our webinar content to introduce you to succession planning, what it is, why it matters, and how you can build a comprehensive succession plan at your organization. We will be recording this webinar, and we'll share that recording along with a copy of the slides with you after, so no need to take notes. As we go, feel free to also post questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar panel. We'll save about 10 minutes at the end to go through those questions together. And if you have any other questions that come up live, you're welcome to keep sharing those. If there's anything that we don't get through today, you're welcome to contact us via email. But for now, don't be shy. Use that Q&A box. That's what it's there for. And we hope that you will find the session both engaging and practical for your team. Okay, and now without any further ado, let me introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Brittany Anderson. So Brittany is a member of our coaching and consulting team. She brings her expertise in evidence-based practice to provide companies with leadership solutions that meet their needs. Primarily, Brittany helps her clients prepare for their future with succession planning and comprehensive leadership development programs. As an executive coach, she helps leaders hone their skills using a process-based approach to development. So we have an expert with us here today. Brittany, thank you for being here, and I'll pass it off to you now to get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Helen, and thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to join us for this session. We have a lot of content that we're going to cover today, so we'll jump right into it. When we get together to talk about succession planning, I find the first place that it's helpful to start is just to get a definition out there, talk about what succession planning is, a little bit about what it's not, and spend some time talking about why succession planning is important. We'll also take you through Sigma's 6-step process that we use when we use succession planning with our clients and with our company. And then we'll go through some tips and tricks for how to implement your succession plan and some ways that you can best support your process as you go along. As Helen said, if you have any questions throughout this, please drop them in the chat and we'll make sure that we can get to them in the Q&A period, or that Helen can provide you with an answer as we go. So to start us off, let's talk about what succession planning is. Succession planning is a future-oriented strategic process. It's this process where we try to not only identify candidates for critical roles, but we work towards developing those candidates to be prepared when those vacancies arise. So inherent in any succession planning process is a talent development process. And I want to make sure that that is something that is very clear right from the outset, and it's certainly something that we'll talk about as we go along. When you're building a succession plan, you're really focusing on building up internal talent well before vacancies arise. Now, what a succession plan looks like will be different for every organization based on the organization's size, resources, timeline, and the goals that they have associated with them. But good succession plans will always share a few core features. So first and foremost, it is good for your succession plan to be goal-oriented. By that, I mean you want to think about why you're engaging in succession planning and what you're hoping to get out of that process as you go along. By understanding what you want your succession plan to do, you can tailor your succession planning activities and your metrics that you'll use to reflect those goals and to help you better accomplish them. Next up, we want succession plans that are ongoing over time. This is something that I'm sure some organizations maybe that you've worked with or that you have experienced in the past have, tried to create a succession plan, worked on it a couple of times, and then put it up on a shelf and not revisited their plan, and it becomes, out of date pretty quickly. So having a succession plan that we are regularly addressing, that we're talking about within our leadership team, that people are working on a regular basis and we have milestones for. That's how you keep these succession plans alive, and that's how you really work towards those goals that we've been talking about. Finally, succession plans should be flexible. We have all seen over the last few years the way that trends outside of our workplace can influence work and the way that we do things. We also know that within organizations, things are always changing, whether that's a change in leadership, a change in priorities from our customers or clients. There's 100 different circumstances that could influence our workplace, and our succession plan needs to be able to keep up with that. So when we keep it goal-oriented, when we revisit our succession plan, often we're more able to be flexible with it and to make sure our succession plan reflects what is going on in our organization. So when we build a succession plan, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build up a pool of qualified candidates for each critical role in our organization. This is not just about finding one individual and making sure that they're ready to move into a critical role in the next couple of weeks, but instead it's about providing development opportunities and growth opportunities for employees across the organization so that we have talent we can rely on as needed. This also helps to increase just the confidence in our ability to fill roles in the company. And this is helpful from a variety of perspectives. Executive boards love to see this, love to see a strong succession plan that, has a number of candidates for critical roles. But it also helps just people within the organization to feel like we know that, if a vacancy were to arise, we would be okay. We would be able to plan for that. We would have the skills needed within the organization, and we would have that sense of stability. And so that's really what we're trying to accomplish with the succession plan, is to provide this roadmap for continuity and stability over time. We know that changes are going to occur, so we can do our best to plan for them in advance and try to make sure that we are prepared for these various situations that we might face. So with that in mind, talking about what succession planning is and providing a bit of a definition to start us out, I wanted to open it up to the people that we have in the session and ask, does your company currently have a succession plan? So Helen will launch a poll here for us. And so you can see up on your screen, you have a couple of options. Succession planning, again, it looks different in every organization, so you can choose the option that best reflects you, whether or not you have a documented succession plan or you have something that's maybe a little bit more informal. Some organizations might have a few replacements in mind for key roles, but maybe not have gone to the full efforts of creating a succession plan, whereas others maybe haven't made progress on this to date. Or you might be in a situation where you're not sure about it. So again, just choose the single choice that best reflects your situation at the moment. All right. So what we're seeing here with the results is a decent mix. We're finding that there are a fair number of people in the session here that have a documented succession planning process, which is great. There will still be some information here for you about how you might be able to improve your processes or add some standardization to it, but it's great to see that documentation is happening. We also have some people reporting that there's no documentation or that they're more in the situation of having only a few replacements in mind. So having this process that we're going to outline for you might give you something you can take away to help shore up your succession planning efforts so far. And for those of you that aren't sure or haven't really thought about succession planning yet, you're definitely in the right place. So we'll be able to talk to you about how you can get those processes rolling in your organization. So thanks, everybody. Now, when I talk about succession planning, sometimes there is a similar concept that can get a little bit mixed up with what succession planning is, and I want to take some time to distinguish succession planning from a related concept that is a bit different. So there's a related process to succession planning that is called replacement hiring. And sometimes when I talk about succession planning and people say, yes, I'm doing this, what they actually mean is that they're doing replacement hiring. So replacement hiring is this process where we have a role that becomes vacant. We know it's going to become vacant, whether that's, somebody's put in a 2 weeks notice or we've been given a month or more of warning that somebody's going to retire. And at the point that we realize this role is going to become vacant, that's when we start looking for one candidate to fill that role. So we say that this is a reactive process. It's not something that you're really working on or thinking about until the role becomes vacant. So it's not something that we are pre-planning for. But when it does, we go out and start looking for the best person available to fill that role. As an example, we have Helen here hosting this webinar. So if we were talking about Helen's role, if Helen were to come and tell us that she was leaving, she was, looking for another opportunity, or she was ready to retire, maybe a little bit early, when we go out and look to fill Helen's role under replacement hiring, we would probably be looking for a new Helen, trying to find somebody with a similar set of skills, maybe similar background or education or experience to our current Helen, so that we feel like it would be a seamless transition. The best way to feel like we're not losing Helen is at least to find ourselves a new Helen. When we're in that situation, what it often looks like is trying to replicate the skills of Helen without really thinking about the role itself and the competencies that might be important for the role itself. Because of that, we're often relying on, what Helen thinks is needed for this role or what Helen's supervisor thinks is needed for the role. And it's not as comprehensive as a look at that actual position. Because we're just trying to replace Helen, we're looking for one successor, one person. And so to some degree, the person that we put into the role will be in the right place at the right time, whether that's somebody internal or somebody external. It's all about who is available at the time because we have this urgent need to fill that position. Although that has worked or works for some organizations, it's not as comprehensive as creating a succession plan. So with succession planning, we are trying to be much more proactive. Before Helen ever tells us that she plans to leave the organization, we identify that Helen's role is one that we always need to have a strong incumbent in. And so well in advance of Helen leaving, we think about what are the qualifications that somebody would need to fill this role? What are the competencies somebody would need to have in order to be successful? Do we have that talent currently within our organization? If so, can we support it? Can we talk to those people about whether or not they're interested in this kind of role? If not, can we help create those talents in the organization? Can we provide people with opportunities to grow the kinds of skills that are needed for this role? When we do that, when we focus on the talent pool, we are preparing more than one individual to be able to step into the role. So then when it does come time that Helen wants to leave and we need to fill this position, we have multiple candidates to choose from, and they're tried and tested. We know these individuals, we know their skills because we've been working with them in our internal talent pool. So we have multiple sources of feedback on their performance, on their abilities, on their strengths, and we can feel really confident and comfortable in filling Helen's role with one of our options from our succession plan. This is also a really sort of employee-focused perspective to filling roles. So it's providing people with opportunities along the way. It's giving them a chance to develop their skills and to try out for positions that they might be interested in. It allows us to use more promotion rather than having to always rely on external hiring for critical roles. And so when I give those two definitions, when I contrast replacement hiring with succession planning, I want to open it back up to the group and ask, would you say in your organization you are doing more succession planning or more replacement hiring? And I want to acknowledge, we could be doing both. Some organizations might be succession planning for their leadership team, but doing replacement hiring for other roles. Or maybe we've done succession planning once or twice, but primarily rely on replacement hiring. So you can select their mix if that's something that your organization does. We'll just give you a minute to select the one that best reflects your organization. Right. Yeah, so this is what we tend to see. A few organizations are engaging in succession planning and are doing so in a more systematic way. But for most companies, either they're exclusively relying on replacement hiring or there's a mix. And I don't think that replacement hiring is something that we need to fully do away with or banish. For most organizations, using that strategy for some positions has worked out well and has been successful. But it's great when we can move organizations to doing more succession planning, taking more of a proactive approach, and really being able to plan in advance for some of these roles and reduce some of the discomforts that sometimes come along with replacement hiring. So when we talk about what succession planning is, I think a lot of people tend to see the value in it, especially people that we have in these sessions. You probably joined it because you're interested in succession planning. Maybe you have tried implementing it, or you know that this is something that's going to fall to your plate, so you'd like to learn a little bit more. Along the way, you might encounter other individuals who aren't as sure about why we should be doing succession planning. I mean, realistically, succession planning takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources. And so some people, whether that's leaders or managers or employees, might be hesitant to engage in some of these succession planning processes. And so I like to just spend a little bit of time talking about why it matters. Both for your own knowledge, but also so you can take this information away and use that to get buy-in from other people when you're rolling out your succession processes. So the most compelling reason for why succession planning is important is that we know that there are changes coming for our organizations. We can't predict with certainty things like what the labor market will do, what the economy will look like, if there's going to be any wide-scale events that are going to change the way that we work. But we can predict turnover. It's absolutely inevitable. We know that every single person in our organization, from our CEO to our star performers to the new person who just joined our company last week, eventually those people will leave the organization. It might be sooner, it might be later, but we know that this is something that's coming our way. And so if we have this inevitability in front of us, something that we know is coming in our future, we might as well do what we can to help prepare for that and to do so well in advance. So succession planning can help you do that, can help you think about the future of critical roles in your organization and create a plan for them well before you need it. But it can also help you accomplish a lot of other goals as well. And when we talk about thinking about the goals for your succession plan, these might be some of the goals that you're trying to accomplish. So succession planning can help you to retain internal knowledge in your organization. Most companies have this sense of, there's one or two people in the company where if you need to get something done, you would go to Helen or whatever person it is. And when Helen or whoever it is walks out the organization, all of that great knowledge that they have goes with them. Succession planning and thinking well in advance about critical roles and critical knowledge can help you to plan to impart that knowledge into other people so that, again, it doesn't leave with one individual. It's something that we can build into our talent pool. Succession planning processes are also motivating. People like opportunities to work on their skills, to talk about their career, to think about their own ambitions, and make progress towards their personal development goals. When you create a succession plan and you build in that talent process, it motivates employees to engage in this process. And it also supports this culture within the organization that we invest in our employees. We want them to grow and we want them to develop. And that's really positive for not only, engaging the people that you have now, but retaining them long term. And beyond that, attracting more employees to your organization when you build up this reputation and this long-standing culture of being a growth-oriented company. Finally, we use succession planning to improve decision-making. Again, when it comes to things like selection and hiring and promotion, a lot of the times decisions are down to one or two people. But with succession planning, we'll talk about how you can use your leadership team as a succession advisory team, and they can work together to make decisions about talent and development and about how we can fill critical roles in the best way possible. So all that is a lot of talk about why succession planning is great and what it is. Let's actually get into how to do it. So at Sigma, we have a standard 6-step process that we use. We use it with all the companies that we work with, whether they're, a small company, a large one, no matter what industry they're in. This is our structured process that we use, and it is based off of the literature and off best practices. The way that you enact these stages, though, might be a little bit different depending on your organization. So the number of critical roles that you identify, the number of successors that you have on your benches, all of these things that we're going to get into more detail about, that might look different depending on your organization. So when we talk about this process, I think it's important to realize that while these 6 steps are all important and they're all something you'll want to include in your plan, the way that you actually enact them and the kinds of goals that you have at each stage will depend to some degree on your organization. Now, if you're one of those people who mentioned earlier that your company is doing succession planning, you do have some documentation, or maybe you've started and you don't fully have your documentation down and you're looking for some support in that area, We do have a number of templates and resources that we use as part of our succession processes that are available online for you to download for free. So Helen will drop a link into the chat, but all of these things down on the right-hand side in that gold-green color, the questionnaires, the profiles, you can go on and download those resources for free, and you can use those to support your succession plan and add a little bit of structure to the process. So let's dive into each of these stages and talk about how you can accomplish your succession planning process. So the first stage in succession planning is to identify critical roles. And it's really important to take some time to be intentional about this stage. Critical roles for succession planning are those roles that your organization needs to focus on or to prioritize as part of your succession planning efforts. So it's not just roles where it's important that we have in our organization. Probably every role in your organization is important. They accomplish some function. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having somebody fill the role. But we're trying to focus on those roles that are important for us to focus on as part of our succession efforts. We probably can't build a succession plan for every single role in the company right away. That's the eventual goal, but we often need to phase succession planning out. Start with a couple of roles, begin building up the plan. Maybe once you have candidates that are in the development process, you can go back and identify more critical roles to work on. So I recommend when you're getting started to think about the key roles in your organization. Most companies start with their leadership team. So when I say key roles in the organization, when the company decides to move forward with succession planning, they often think about their executive team, their top leadership positions, their upper management. And that's not a bad place to start. I absolutely think that having a succession plan for the leaders in your organization is important. But I also want to acknowledge that there are other roles that you may want to consider as urgent and you may want to focus on when you're getting started with succession planning. One of the most frequently overlooked areas, I would say, is administrative staff. So when I talked about retaining organizational knowledge and the person who just knows how to get things done, that's usually someone on your admin team or maybe an office manager, somebody who's been with the organization for a while, and you might want to consider building a succession plan for those roles before too long. The other area that we recommend thinking about when you're building your succession plan are those areas with what we call high dependencies. So if you have a role where their work is required for other people to be successful, maybe it's your sales team, maybe it's your marketing team, maybe it's your warehouse. If you have one of those roles in your organization that comes to mind, again, you probably want to prioritize some succession efforts there. Or if you have roles where there's little overlap in skill sets, so maybe you have a small IT or HR team. And because of that, you don't have a lot of internal talent at the moment that could step in if you needed to. And so you might need to focus some efforts a little more intentionally there in order to build talent for those kinds of roles. Now, so far, what I have been talking about is critical roles, and that is what the stage is called. And that is where I want you to focus your effort, is on the position itself. But I don't want to overlook the fact that there are also essential people in our organizations. Sometimes they occupy critical roles, and that lines up nicely. But other times you have a person that is just such a star, such a great performer that even if their role was not originally something you might think of as critical, they have expanded it or added responsibilities or brought something special to that role that you can no longer imagine functioning without them. If that brings somebody to mind for you or a couple of somebodies to mind for you, you might want to think about including that person in your list when you're creating your list of critical roles, because again, it might be challenging to find somebody that is as special or as skilled or as talented as the person that you're thinking about. And so creating a succession plan well in advance to identify those competencies that they have and how we can build it up in our talent pool is going to help you in the long run. Now, once you have identified your critical roles, you're going to turn your attention to building a success profile. And you want to build a success profile for each critical role that you identify. So this is a reason why we often can't identify every role as critical right off the bat. We need to think about, how many roles we can be building success profiles for, we can be supporting talent development for. And with success profiles, we do want to make sure that we give ourselves some time and some resources to be able to create these. These serve as a foundation for your development processes later, so you want to get your success profiles right. Now, a success profile is a document that you use to keep track of the necessary competencies that are required to be successful in a role. And we recommend looking at competencies in a couple of different ways. So first, and probably most importantly, you want to look at those competencies that are important for success, to be effective in that role. What are the competencies that are required to accomplish the required tasks and duties associated with the role? What are the competencies that are associated with maybe, leading your team or being effective in your functional area? We also want you to think about competencies that are associated with success in your organization more broadly. Are there competencies that are aligned with your company's strategic mission or your goals or your values? Things like communication skills or valuing diversity. Including those competencies in your success profile can help you to find someone that fits well within your organization, but it can also just help you build well-rounded leaders within the company. And then finally, when you build success profiles, we want you to not only think about the competencies that are important right now, but those that are going to be important for the future of your role and of your company. Again, we know things are changing. I imagine that for most people here in the session, the role that you are in now is slightly different from the way that it was when you first started it. And roles tend to change and shift and merge a little bit over time. So thinking about where a role is going and the kinds of competencies that might be associated with that can help us to build really strong success profiles. So it can be helpful just to have a bit of a visual with this. So I will put up a sample success profile here. You can see we have a long list of competencies that are associated with success in the role. So on the far hand side, they're core role competencies. Also competencies that are associated with success as a leader in the company. So those leadership competencies we see down the middle. And then we have some just general position criteria. So some information about the kinds of education, experience, maybe tenure or designations, qualifications that somebody might need to be successful in the role. Not necessarily competencies, but boxes that we need people to be able to check before they can move into the position. So if you don't have a bachelor's in HR, you maybe wouldn't be considered a good candidate for the HR director. And we know that somebody would need to go and get that education before they'd be considered a good candidate. With these competencies, we consider all of this to be part of a profile for a role. So even though we have said decisiveness is a leadership competency, we are still saying that decisiveness is important for this HR director role. And if we were to develop somebody to step into that role, decisiveness is one of the competencies we'd want to focus on. So this is one of the templates that you can download from our website. So if you're interested in building success profiles, please go on and check that out and feel free to download it and use that in your organization. But I want to turn our attention now to talking about nominating successors. I know a lot of organizations start here when they're building their development or their succession plans. And I do want to say, this is a really important stage for us to spend time on and to really, think about talent critically within the organization. But I do recommend that you only turn to this after you have identified critical roles and you have defined what those roles look like with success profiles. So when you're nominating successors, you are taking the time to consider the potential candidates for each of your critical roles. And I think that language is important. These are potential candidates. Not everyone that is on the list will one day occupy the role. So if we're talking about our HR director role, not everybody that we nominate as a potential successor will fill that position one day. And maybe they won't even actually have all of the skills or competencies required for it. Instead, we're focused on people with the potential to step into those roles. People that, if we took the time and the effort to develop them, could move into that role in the future. And maybe it's a little ways off in the future, and that's okay as well. Now, most people, when they think about this, will start with direct reports. So if we're talking about the HR director, they will look at things like the HR manager, the HR business partner, and consider those individuals as potential candidates. Again, great place to start. But I would recommend that you also challenge yourself to think of people outside of that functional area or that team. Think about if there are people in the administrative team, in the marketing department, in other areas of your organization that have the potential to be strong in HR and as an HR manager or director. We want to be thinking about that leadership pipeline. So we do want a mix of people that are ready in the near future and those that might not be ready for a while, but could get there if they had the time and the development efforts put aside. When an individual leaves their position, so when the current incumbent leaves it, this bench stays with the role. So we want to make sure that it's robust enough that when I leave my position, the person who comes after me has a sense of the kind of talent and can continue on with development efforts. So again, to help us visualize it, we have our bench here. This is our template that we use when we're building succession plans. And you can see that there are some individuals listed at level A, somebody listed at level B. For this role, we don't have anyone listed at level C, but there is room there to be able to indicate those candidates that are ready in the short term, in the moderate term, and in the long term. You can also see in our bench, we include other information like the progression to succession position. So how long it takes somebody to transition from being a level B candidate up to being a level A candidate. We also include information about the succession path. So for people that are a little further away from stepping into the HR director role, is there any other position that we would want them to occupy first? So for Sarah, one of our candidates that we've listed here on level B, she's currently the HR lead. She shows potential for being an HR director, but we think that she should occupy the role of an HR manager first, and that she would be ready for that role within the next 6 months. So if she's going to move up into the HR director role one day, or if she's interested in it, that's the stepping stone that she needs to take in order to be a more qualified candidate. And so there's lots of information about how to use our bench online as well, if you're interested. But it's really helpful to be able to see the picture of talent in your organization and to have this formal documentation so that you have a good sense of where the talent lies and where some more development effort might be needed. Once you have your potential candidates listed, you can turn your attention to assessing the needs in your organization for development. When we use assessments, what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand the strengths and development opportunities of every candidate that we have listed. You want to use an assessment that is a well-validated, scientifically based measure so that you can be confident that you are actually measuring the skills that are relevant to the succession position. So at Sigma, we use our leadership skills profile, the LSPR. This is a competency-based measure that uses personality traits to help us understand the natural tendencies of our candidates and to help us understand those places where they are already strong for a role and where they might need to focus some development efforts in order to become more qualified candidates. We also recommend using assessments sort of nice and early in this process to not only get those development conversations going, but also so that we can understand the current baseline skill of the individuals that we have on our bench. And so over time, when we are developing individuals and providing them with opportunities, we can look back and see how far people have come. It's important to use something that is objective when we're going through this process. This is a great place to add objectivity into your succession plan, and selecting the right assessment is something that is really, really important. So take some time to consider your options and make sure that you are looking into the psychometric properties of an assessment and choosing one that is going to help you understand an individual's relevant skills and development opportunities. Next up, we have the develop talent stage. At this stage, you want to provide individuals with opportunities for growth and development. And specifically, you want to provide them with opportunities that will help them become more qualified candidates for these roles. So you have your success profile, you have a good understanding of the competencies that are required for success. In the develop talent stage, we want to help people work on those skills. So there are 100 or more different ways to develop talent, everything from coaching programs to job shadowing or secondments or stretch assignments, educational courses, group training. There's so many different ways to do this. And from my perspective, there's not really a right or a wrong way, but rather there's the way that can best fit your candidate's needs. And so I recommend that you allow candidates some time to sit down and think about their development priorities. Have them talk with their leaders or other individuals in the organization about where they should be focusing their development efforts. Then help them find ways to practice those skills. So for some people, that might mean group training and communication. For others, it might be some one-on-one practice on building up your strategic planning skills. People will face obstacles along the way. That is a natural part of the develop talent process. So thinking about how you can help people overcome those obstacles or how they can face challenges and persist despite them can help set up your development plan and your development processes for success. Now, this stage takes time, and I want people to be aware of that. When you're working through the develop talent stage, it's not something that can be done overnight. It's not something that can be done in a week. It takes months, and it takes time for people to make mistakes, learn new behaviors, build up new skills. So prepare for yourself that this is something that is going to be an ongoing process, and it's going to take some dedication from not only your candidates, but leaders and other supports in the organization to make sure that this is something that we can sustain. You can see here, we also have a template to help support with this. We like to have documentation and templates to guide you along the way, and this is one that's really helpful for the develop talent stage. You can list all of the candidates that you have for a role, all of the individuals that you've nominated in a previous stage, and think about some of the development opportunities that would be the most helpful for them. So if you have somebody in level A, like we have Jerry, maybe Jerry's at the point where he needs an opportunity to shadow the current HR director, to see some of the day-to-day activities that Jane gets up to and get some exposure to these behaviors. Whereas Sarah, because she's a little further away, she might be able to work on some self-directed or some group training, and maybe that shadowing or that kind of experience that Jerry is going through will be saved for later when she's closer to being a qualified candidate for the role. The final stage that we have here is to measure progress. What we're trying to do at this stage is we're trying to track how things have been going in our succession plan. And we want to use this as an opportunity to understand where things are going well and where we might be able to make improvements. Again, succession planning is ongoing. It's something that we're going to do year over year. And there will always be places where we can optimize our succession plan and do things a bit better year over year. We will learn lessons, and we want to be able to implement those lessons over time. There are a lot of different metrics you can use to measure the success of your plan. The best metrics to use for you are those that reflect the goals of your company. So if one of your goals was to reduce turnover and engage individuals as part of the succession planning process, you probably want to look at retention rates. You probably want to look at your engagement survey and ask people about their engagement and use that to measure the progress you've been making towards that goal. If your goal is to be doing more internal promotion for critical roles, you can look at the rate of promotion, how often you need to use external hires versus being able to use internal hires to fill roles. In order to best understand the progress that your plan is making, we need to understand where you're at now. So even if you're getting started on your succession plan or you've spent a bit of time on your succession plan, it's great to measure your progress early to establish a baseline. So start now. Record what your goals are, and then go in and look for numbers that you can attach to those goals and record where you're at right now, so that 6 months down the line, when you have started assessing people, you've started providing development opportunities, you can compare and see how things have changed. Be aware that metrics will change at different rates. So you might see changes in your engagement survey earlier than you might see changes in, say, your turnover rate, because turnover has sort of a longer lead time until that is affected by things like succession planning. So don't be discouraged if everything hasn't changed in the first 6 months. Keep up regular measuring of your metrics, and you'll be able to see the trends and changes over time. Now, although that is the last stage of the succession planning process, it doesn't mean that when we reach measure progress, we're done. Again, succession planning is this ongoing effort. It's something you're going to be doing over the long term, and you'll probably be revisiting these stages at different times. So if you started small and you've built a succession plan for maybe 5 or 6 roles, as you're developing talent and you're underway with your coaching or your development processes, you might feel like you have capacity to go back and identify a few more critical roles. And that's totally fine. You can be working on multiple stages at the same time. You'll be phasing your succession plan out. I just want you to remember to revisit stages like your measure progress, to go back and check on your metrics on a regular basis. Every 6 to 12 months is sort of our best practices. And just remember that you can update all of these stages as you go along. Nothing is set in stone. Your succession plan is a living document, and you're going to want to revisit it as you go. So if you follow all of those stages, you'll be well on your way to creating a good succession plan for yourself. But I want you to be aware that even with a structured process, there are still some common challenges that organizations face when creating their succession plan. And so if we are aware of what these common challenges are, we can keep an eye out for them and try to avoid them or try to correct course if we find that this is something that we've fallen into. So some of the most common challenges that organizations face when creating their succession plan include a very narrow focus on the executive level. So at that identify critical role stage, they decide to focus on their executive team, and then they never really progress beyond that. So again, if you want to start there, that's fine, but try to keep in mind other roles that you can include, or start building a plan for how you're going to phase your succession plan out to more roles over time. Many organizations also fail to document the process. I would say this is one of the biggest challenges that I face when I am supporting clients to go through their succession planning process. A lot of companies will say, we tried to do this in the past. We built a succession plan maybe 5-6 years ago, and we never looked at it again. And then when we did open it, because our executive board mentioned it, it was completely out of date. None of the names on it were relevant anymore. Some of the positions had changed, and the succession plan didn't really reflect the reality of our organization. If you let your succession plan get too out of date, it becomes very challenging to actually make progress on your goals. So our recommendation is that you have your succession advisory team, you have leaders that regularly meet and discuss your succession plan, and that they provide updates to the plan as they go. So if somebody moves out of a role and a new person moves into it, we document that on our succession benches, and we document that on our success profiles. If we hire a lot of people, we go in and update our benches. So just making sure that this is something that we keep top of mind for ourselves. We also have a lot of organizations, a lot of people in organizations asking us how transparent we should be. And keeping your succession plan a complete secret does pose a threat to the success of your succession plan. So if nobody knows you're doing it, it's really hard for individuals to understand why they should be doing assessments or to make progress on developing talent in a way that is actually meaningful for your succession plan. So we do recommend a degree of transparency around your succession plan. I wouldn't go out and show everyone the benches and publish them, because that can foster a lot of competition and some not great feelings. But I would say that, you can let people know that you are working on a succession plan, that this will come with development processes, and that developing talent is important in your organization. Make sure that succession planning is something that your leaders talk about and continue to talk about over time. Finally, we see a lot of organizations delegate all the tasks associated with succession planning to one person, typically in HR. We've talked in a few places about how a succession advisory team can be really helpful. So just thinking about how you can have multiple people have responsibility for your succession plan and help to move it forward. Now, even if you are able to successfully overcome all of those challenges, you're able to create an absolutely beautiful succession plan, there are still challenges associated with implementation. You can see here a lot of strategic plans, like succession planning, tend to fail in organizations. We have great intentions, but we're busy, and it's really hard to move forward with a new initiative like succession planning or other strategic plans. And a lot of leaders rate their company as being pretty poor in this area. And succession planning is no different from other strategic processes. It's hard to dedicate time and effort towards something like this. And if you're at the early stages of building a succession plan, it can feel a bit ambiguous and hard to know where to go next. So when you're going through your succession planning process, you just need to think about the supports that you can build in so that your succession plan can be successful over time. And this is when working with a consultant can be really helpful, when they can bring in some of their expertise and support to help guide you through the process. So I want to take a moment and just ask the group, when it comes to strategic plans like succession planning or other strategic processes, given that quite a few companies haven't yet worked on succession planning, how successful would you say your company is at implementing these strategic plans? You've got a few options there, and I'll just give you a moment to select the one that most closely reflects your situation, whether it's that you always follow through on these plans, or that you have more of a inconsistent track record, but you have sometimes followed through on strategic processes, versus the organizations that either don't create their plans or create them but haven't really been able to follow through and fully implement those plans. And we'll just give you another moment here to select your option. Okay, maybe we can see the results. Perfect. So what we're seeing is that, again, some companies are strong at this, are able to follow through on their strategic plans, but more often organizations either struggle to follow through on plans or struggle to create them in the first place. That's really common, and if that's something that you're facing, you're certainly not alone in that. Again, there are so many things on the plates of leaders, and it can be really challenging to create and follow through on these strategic plans. So I'd like to get a sense, what are some of the challenges that you tend to face when, implementation or creation of strategic plans becomes a problem? Even for those of you that said that you are great at creating strategic plans and your company is great at following through, you probably still face some obstacles to your plan, so you can still select some of these options that maybe you have encountered in the past. We know that you can certainly face more than one of these, so feel free to select multiple options here. Whether your challenge is finding the time to implement your strategic plans, whether there's not enough buy-in or knowledge in your organization, whether that lack of documentation and standardization has been a problem, or if there's just not that much dedication and commitment towards the project. And again, feel free to select multiple if that's reflective of your situation. All right, let's take a look. So the most common one here is definitely the one that I hear about all the time. It's time. People struggle with finding the time to do this. We are busy, we have a lot of responsibilities, we probably face barriers to just having enough hours in the day to get our stuff done in the first place, let alone to be able to accomplish things like strategic plans and succession plan. But these other barriers are not insignificant either. Things like having the buy-in and the knowledge in your organization, or being, really committed to the process over the long term. And again, this is something that a lot of organizations face. It's something that will continue to be challenges for organizations as we continue to have, a lot of responsibilities and high workloads. If you are wanting to make progress on your succession plan, though, this is where bringing in a consultant can be really helpful to help you overcome some of those barriers. By bringing in a consultant, one of the main things that you are going to save is time. It's somebody that can take a lot of those responsibilities off of your plate and can take on a lot of that work for you. But consultants will also bring in a standardized process to you. We have this 6-stage process at Sigma that we use. Having a standardized evidence-based practice can be really helpful to just knowing where to start and knowing what the next steps need to be. Consultants can also help you remain accountable to the plan. So talk to different stakeholders and strategic partners, make sure that everybody is aware of the milestones and keep everybody on track with those. And they can add objectivity and expertise to your process. So an outside lens can help you to understand the challenges that you might face and take an objective look at them and make the best decisions for your organization. So if you're thinking about how you can support succession planning in your organization, we do have different levels of support for you. So if you're interested, please feel free to check out some of these things on our website. If you're just looking for some education, some templates, you feel like you're in a pretty good place, but you could use just a little bit of optimization, we have our succession planning guide online. If you want a little bit more supportive training, we do have a free training on the website that you can follow. It's recorded, so you can check it out, revisit parts that are more challenging to you, and again, get access to our templates and educational resources. But if you're looking for more support, a little bit more hands-on support, something that will, provide you with a completed succession plan at the end of the engagement, you might be interested in our succession planning launch. So this is where we have a consultant come into your organization and work with your leadership team to create your succession plan. It only takes 2 half-day workshops, so not too much time required from your leadership team, but it does result in your step-by-step succession planning process for the next 12 months. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out. Helen might have some information about that she can drop in the chat, but you also can check out our website or give us a call. So yeah, if you have any questions, my email and contact information is here. I'm certainly happy to help or discuss any of these things with you. And for now, we can maybe turn it over to a couple of questions. Helen, if there's some questions that people have been posing.
There are. Thank you, Brittany, for another excellent webinar. So let's get started here. Feel free to continue posting questions in the Q&A as we go. We'll try to get through as many as we can. So the first question is about career plans. Are those a prerequisite to creating a succession plan?
I would say, most of the organizations that I talk with don't have a lot of career plans for their individuals. So I don't think it's a requisite to be able to move forward with succession planning efforts. I think as part of your succession plan, you will talk to individuals about their career intentions, where they would like to go, what their own personal ambitions are, and you can build sort of that career planning process into the develop talent stage, but you don't need to have it in place beforehand. And maybe you have people that want to develop some skills without really knowing what their end goal is, and that's all right as well. Developing talent is a journey of discovery, and so career planning may come along with it, but it's not required in order to move forward.
Thank you. Okay, I see some hands raised. Just a reminder to please send your question through the Q&A. We will be collecting them that way. Okay, along a similar note, is a competency framework a prerequisite for succession planning?
So having one in place already is not required, but having one as part of your succession process absolutely helps. If you have a competency framework in place, you can use that to standardize the competencies that are on your success profiles. You can use that to choose an assessment that will reflect those competencies, and you can use that to standardize conversations about talent across individuals. So I use our competency model. Sigma has a competency model, leadership competency framework that we use. I use that with all of my clients because it helps get us on the same page about those competencies that are important for success, about what those competencies are actually defined as. So help us all have a shared understanding of what communication is or what business acumen is. And then that can really help us to, understand common development opportunities, provide group training for people. So if you don't have one in place already, again, that's okay. You can still start identifying critical roles and talking about competencies. But I do find that using an established competency framework can really help you to add a lot of structure and consistency underlying your process.
And I'll share the link to that competency framework in our chat here as well. The great thing about this is it corresponds to all of our resources and our leadership assessments. So that way you can have everything, not using different language, and the steps and tools can build off of each other. So feel free to take a look at that and let us know if you have any questions.
Perfect.
Okay, next question. So one of the challenges of building success profiles is that they take quite a bit of time. How do we ensure that leaders keep using these rather than them being on the back burner?
Yeah, they do take time, and especially if we're being really thoughtful and intentional about it. The way that we continue to ensure the success profiles get used is by integrating them with our assessment and our development processes. So if you have an assessment that reflects the competencies that are on your success profile, it's very easy for candidates and leaders alike to make the connection between the success profile and an individual's strengths and development opportunities. That way you can look through their assessment results, you can identify, these are some of the competencies that are important for success in this role. These are the ones that you might have more room for growth on. Let's focus our development efforts on it. So if you are using either a competency framework or, a nice consistent set of language around competencies, you will be turning to those success profiles all the time to be able to guide your development process.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more step-specific questions. So when we're nominating successors, how do you create visibility for potential candidates to expand that pool of options that you have?
Yeah, it can be hard when you're a leader, especially if you're a leader that has direct reports who also have direct reports. It can be hard to know everybody in the organization, know all of the talent. So there's a couple of ways that I would say you can increase the visibility and just increase the depth in your bench. Number one is to talk about talent as a leadership team. So getting together as a group and talking about the names that you've put on your bench, the names that others have put on the bench. If there's anyone in your team that that shows potential, talking about their skills and seeing if they fit on other benches, all can help us come up with sort of what we call these cross-functional candidates, individuals from other teams that we can put onto benches. I would also recommend that you can talk about talent within your own team. So if you're a leader and you're thinking, I don't know my direct reports, and down the line, you can talk to managers about talent, talk to them about individuals in your company, do your best to have development conversations with individuals, and that way you can get a sense of more names, other individuals with potential that you can put onto your bench.
Great, thank you. Okay, and now for developing talent, how do you support the development activities that might be outside of some of those more formal things like assignments or job swapping?
Yeah, leaders still play an important role in supporting development outside of the kinds of responsibilities that they can assign to people. One of the ways that I always encourage leaders to support development processes is by keeping an eye out for development opportunities for their candidates or their nominees. So if you've had discussions with your talent, your individuals on your bench, and you know that they're looking for an opportunity around strategic planning, you don't really have anything for them, you can talk to other leaders about it. You can keep an ear out for, other opportunities that might be out there and recommend them to the individual, or talk to other leaders and say, is there a place for my candidate to support on this a little bit? So working together as a leadership team is a great way. You can also talk to your candidate about some of the things that they might want, and then do your best to advocate for them. So using their engagement and their motivation to help guide this process is also really helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. This one is about measuring success. So can you give a couple of examples of metrics that our clients have found helpful things to use to measure success on those succession plans?
Sure. So I recommend that companies stick to maybe 3 metrics. So I'll list off a few, but I would say probably don't do all of them. Choose the ones that best reflect your goals. But some of the metrics that I have used with clients in the past include things like turnover rate is probably the most common one. It's something that is usually easy to get in an organization. The number of employees that are turning over. We also will look at turnover rates within a program. So if you run a developed talent program and you support people, looking at if there's any difference between your overall turnover rate and the turnover of individuals that have had development opportunities. We can also look at things within your succession plan and use those as metrics to support kind of the understanding of your plan. So for example, you can look at the number of benches that have multiple candidates on them. You can look at the number of benches or the proportion of benches that have A-level candidates that are going to be ready in the short term. You can look at how much movement you have across your benches over time and if you're making positive progress towards strengthening your benches. You can also look at other data that you might have, things like engagement surveys or satisfaction surveys. If you've got that information, I highly recommend that you include it. It helps employees to feel heard, and it also helps you to understand some of the things that are on their minds.
Great, thank you, Brittany. Okay, I see some more questions just trickling in now. I'm sorry we won't have the time to talk through it, but please do send us an email. Brittany's email is up there on the screen. We'd be happy to follow up. I also just have a few closing announcements. One is for anyone who is here to collect SHRM or ATD professional development credits. For SHRM in particular, we will need to send you a certificate of completion. So if you could please indicate on this poll if you would like a professional development credit for either SHRM or ATD, that would be great. We will get those certificates to you. And then if you liked what you saw here, please take a look at our webinar calendar. Next week, we will have all of our new webinars up for 2024. I'll share the link in the chat there as well. So take a look at that. If there's anything you don't see that you'd like to see, send us an email. We want these to be helpful for you. And on a similar note, we also have a feedback survey that will pop up when you close out of the webinar at the end of the session. We do go through every single response on there, and we take your input into account when we're creating new sessions. So let us know what you liked, let us know what you didn't like. And again, if there's anything else that you'd like to discuss with our team, send us an email. We'd love to keep chatting. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Brittany, for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your day.